My name is Jeff Moffat. I worked with the Canadian Mental Health Association, the BC division, which is sort of, we'll talk about what that looks like. And I work out of Victoria, the traditional unceded lands of the Lekwungen speaking people, the Esquimalt and the Songhees. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I'm so thankful to be here, to be able to share this presentation with you today. And I look forward to um, answering any questions today. If you have questions throughout, please type them in the chat. I will try to address them as they come up. Hopefully, there'll be some time at the end for questions if you want at that point. But awesome. Glad to see everyone coming in, letting us know where you're coming from, where you're joining us from today. Thank you for all that. I truly appreciate that. So let me begin. Do this. There we go. I'd like to begin by fully acknowledging that the offices of the BC Division of Canadian Mental Health Association are located on the traditional and unceded lands of the Musqueam, the Tsleil-Waututh, and the Squamish people, as well as over here on the island, the Lekwungen speaking people, the Esquimalt, and the Songhees. So coming from lovely Victoria today, so thankful to be here with you. Glad to see all the chat where everyone's coming from. Coquitlam, Castlegar, Vancouver, love it. Come on, keep coming in, and yeah, thank you for that. And I just like to introduce myself a little bit more. I'm originally from Winnipeg, Manitoba. I moved here to British Columbia in 2012. In Winnipeg, I realized after a while that, hey, we can actually live in Canada and not have to deal with minus 40 all the time in the winter and mosquitoes. So made the move to Victoria and very happy to have done that. I love Winnipeg, spent 40 years of my life there, but definitely it's nice to be here. Part of the reason why I'm really passionate about talking about mental health, mental wellness, and when it comes to stigma, because I used to work in corrections in Manitoba. I was a correctional officer for 6 years, and I worked as a program facilitator and then as a probation officer. And during that time, language became so very important to me as to helping support people that were facing and living with criminal records to helping support people make changes. And one of the things I truly understood. And wow, for Sao Paulo, welcome, Fabiana. Oh, so great to see you here. Oh, amazing. One of the reasons why just realized how language can be used to support people and helping them work towards changes that they're looking to work towards. But also, in my experience, it can also be something that can push people away and create barriers for ourselves. So I just absolutely want to acknowledge that. And as we move forward today, I will definitely talk about some of my experience working in corrections. As not only did I work in corrections, I've also worked in client-facing services for over 25 years. So corrections was a part of that. But since moving to Victoria, I've worked in a number of nonprofit situations and organizations, including Canadian Mental Health Association and other ones too. So everything that I'm not even gonna get there yet. So today, what we're gonna do, we're gonna talk about a little bit on mental health information, just some background information, some foundation information. Then we're gonna talk about stigma and mental health stigma, because that is a stigma that is out there that is really prevalent and it holds people back from getting supports that they need. Then we're gonna look at the power of language and what language can do, how we can help build people up and tear people down in some ways. And then we're going to look at inclusive language principles and the principles of inclusive language, including how we can use language to help support people working through things. And we'll finish off today with mental health resources in BC, including here at the Canadian Mental Health Association, but some other resources that might be helpful for you too. Again, at any time, if you have questions, please feel free to type them in the chat. I would love that. I'll love to answer any of those, and I'll try to come back and address them as they come in, or at the end, if we have time, address them at that point too. So about Canadian Mental Health Association. CMHA one of Canada's most established charities. It started in 1918 as a response for people coming back from World War I who were experiencing at that time what was known as shell shock and some other mental health challenges, which now we know as post-traumatic stress disorder. So we're anchored. Everything we do is anchored in evidence. We do research. We understand the latest trends, and we talk about those, but also informed by personal experience. We also really value lived experience of individuals with their mental health, their mental wellness, any illness that they might have, but also just in general day-to-day life. What is going on for you, and how are you dealing with that? Our motto is mental health for all, and that includes people with addictions. Um, People living with addictions are essentially they're living with a mental health challenge. The addiction itself is a mental health challenge, and so we are there to support people in all walks of life, in all situations and circumstances, to help have better mental health for all. We are community-based throughout Canada. We work on a federated model. So we do have a national office and then other offices underneath that. Each office is run separately, but under the umbrella of the Canadian Mental Health Association. There are 14 branches in BC. Again, I work for the BC division, so we try to provide support for the local branches throughout British Columbia in either support with mental health resources or just a place to connect with and have those opportunities. So I feel like I'm just sort of jumping around here. Um, about terminology. So mental health and mental illness often used interchangeably, but they mean very different things. Mental health is a state of well-being in which an individual realizes their own potential and can cope with the normal stresses of life, can work productively and fruitfully, and is able to contribute to the community. So mental health, I look at as along the same lines as physical health. We all have physical health. That continuum, we could be very physically healthy. We might not be very physically healthy. The same happens with our mental health. So again, oftentimes mental health is used in correlation with mental illness, but I want us to realize that we all have mental health. It's just where we are in that continuum and how that works for us. Whereas mental illness is a health condition involving changes in emotion, thinking, or behavior, or a combination of all of them. So when we talk about mental illness, that's where we have a diagnosis from a doctor saying that there has been something that's not going right for us, and we're here to help take a look at that. So I'll use these terminologies as we go through today. Mental illness risk factors, because everyone has a tendency or a capability of having a mental illness. So just some risk factors on it. Genetics, a major component. If you live in a family where mental health or mental illness is present, you have a higher rate of gaining a mental illness. Again, it doesn't mean it's 100%, but it just means that your risk is higher for that. Family history, personal history, including discrimination, and we're going to talk about some of that today. But definitely the family history on how, has there been any family breakups or any challenges within the family? Your personal history, how do you deal with stresses in your life and discrimination? If you face discrimination over and over again, and it doesn't have to be, discrimination comes in many forms, as we'll talk about as we move forward, but it could be based on race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, gender preference, religion, mental health challenge. It all can be part of that understanding of discrimination. A trauma, if you've experienced trauma, then you have a higher risk of facing a mental illness in your life. And let's be honest, who hasn't faced some level of trauma in your lives? You're right. So I think how we respond to that trauma and how prevalent that trauma has been in our lives really play a factor as to whether or not it is a risk factor for us or more of a risk factor for us. Personal stressors, how do you deal with stress yourself individually? That really takes a toll because we all have different things that we find stressful, and we all have different coping mechanisms to work through that. And so personal stressors, there's lots of stuff like relationships, finances, housing concerns, all that kind of food security, all that kind of stuff. But then workplace stressors. I work for the workplace mental health department, part of CMHA, because there is real stressors that come directly from work. Work provides a lot of positive stuff for us within that when it comes to socialization and connection to other people, but it also comes with its variety of stressors. So just be aware of that as we go through. When we look at challenges with mental health challenges, with equity, we all live with our own challenges when it comes to mental health and our relationship with that for ourselves based on our own stigma and the way that we view it. But when it comes to people that live in marginalized groups, traditionally marginalized groups, it becomes more of a factor when it comes to equity and that mental health piece. So marginalized groups have decreased access to the determinants of health that are essential for recovery. And those include food, housing, work, social connection. So if you are a part of a marginalized group, then there can be decreased access to those aspects for you. Marginalized groups are more likely to experience poor mental health and mental health conditions because of those other elements that are there too that are weighing and putting stress on them. I know people that absolutely were trying to find, that old story of, yeah, I was looking for an apartment and I called someone up and they said, yes, we can come by, take a look. And they showed up and and when they showed up and saw the person face to face, they were told that the apartment wasn't available anymore. The person happened to be Indigenous. And so again, I think not saying for sure that that played a part in them not attaining that apartment, but it seems kind of suspicious to me, if you will. Um, Mental health matters for equity. When it comes to equity, we really mental health is a major. Yeah, it's a sad and old tale, but it really happens, and it happens. The story I just told happened 6 months ago here in Victoria, and it just blew my mind that of course I know that there's still discrimination and stigma out there, but it breaks my heart to think that it still happens on a regular basis. So when it comes to equity, poor mental health and mental health conditions have a negative impact on equity. If you're not feeling that you are well and you don't know if you can get support for that, for not feeling well, then it's just going to continue getting worse and worse and worse. We look at mental health on a continuum. So if you're starting to feel that, this is normal for you and you're starting to feel the stress building up, building up, building up and taking you away from that, the earlier you recognize that to get back to that normal becomes really beneficial for us. So just understanding that. And really, when you look at all the factors that come that face people that are living in marginalized groups, then it's not just the inequalities of life and the challenges with that, and the inequalities of the mental health piece and the challenges of getting support for that. But it comes together and it really plays, they intersect, and that intersectionality creates experiences of inequality and mental health that poses added challenges to the individual, the community, and the health systems level. So again, realizing that best intentions for everyone. I think we're all out there trying to do the best we can, connect and do the work that we want to do. But unfortunately, there are groups of people that experience poverty, racialization, homophobia, gender disparity, all that kind of stuff, and we really it's difficult for us to work through that. Alfred, can we get a copy PowerPoint transcript of this webinar? Yes, this presentation will be provided to you after we're done, so you will definitely get a copy of this. Thank you for that. So when we look at mental health and equity, and we look at the differences with marginalized groups, this is really why I thought it was important for us to have this conversation and to really look at this. So I hope you feel the same way. I see there's lots of people here today, so I'm so thankful for that. And yeah, let's take a look at stigma and mental health stigma, because they are similar, they're connected. But when we look at stigma, we're going to take a look at what it does and how it affects us. And Stigma is one of those words that I think are out there in the vernacular, and people have a general idea of what it might be or might not be. So I just want to set the table and give you a definition for stigma that I like to work with when it comes to looking at mental health. So stigma is attitudes and judgments that affect how we think about and behave towards others. So it's attitudes and beliefs that we have in our head that lead to judgments that affect how we think about and behave towards others and how we treat other people. Those attitudes can be negative attitudes, and that negative attitude and behavior towards others based on their gender, their sexual orientation, their culture, their race, their religion, mental health challenges, yada 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 yada. It keeps going. As long as we can find reasons to single ourselves out and to group ourselves into us and them, I think we have a level of stigma that's going to come out, because by connecting ourselves to a group and say this is us means anyone that's not us are essentially them, and that can lead to stigma and stigmatizing attitudes that they're not the same as us, they're not as good as us, there's something different about them, maybe there's something scary. So when we look at stigma, stigma is connect completely with discrimination. So when we look at stigma and discrimination, it's negative attitudes, they remain widespread, leading to stereotyping, fear, and discrimination, or stigma, if you will. Stigma includes being fear of being judged, and that delays or prevents people from seeking help. You know, if you think that you're going to go and get judged when you're feeling not well, that there's going to be someone that points the finger at you and says, like, what are you doing? How come this is going on? You know, what, of course that's happening to you, then I'm just not going to go and get that help. Because why would I? Nobody wants to feel judged. Nobody wants to feel singled out and put blame on for something that is absolutely something we all live with. Again, our mental health that can lead to mental illness. So stigma can affect the person long after symptoms of mental illness have diminished. Is so when we look at great question, Marielle. Answer that, Mariella. I'll answer that right away. Stigma, it really, if someone gets stigmatized because of a mental health challenge, that mental health challenge can absolutely be dealt with and worked through. And it doesn't, but yet and that person returns to normal behavior and normal ways of connecting with people and living a productive life. But that stigma of that mental illness or that time off might follow them through the workplace. I know when I was a kid, and yes, kids are cruel. And there was a boy that I went to school with who didn't necessarily have the best hygiene at the time when we were in grade 4. So he was labeled as the smelly guy, the smelly kid. And, kids are cruel, and that followed him along. Even after, once we got into middle school and then high school, his hygiene absolutely changed, and he was able to work through whatever challenges he had there, but he was still labeled as the smelly kid. That carried through from elementary school all the way through high school. And I'm hopeful. I haven't talked to him since we graduated high school way long ago, but I'm hopeful that moniker didn't follow him throughout post school. But that stigma sticks around. It's easy to stigmatize people because you start looking at the things that are different between them and us, and then we make that with a discrimination piece, or they aren't as good as us. So when we look at mental health challenges, that contributes to disabilities or a disability under the mental health, the BC and Canadian Human Rights Code. So it is protected legally that you cannot discriminate against someone because of a mental illness. However, putting that down on paper and practicing that is very different, as I think we all can attest to in a number of ways. When you have something that's written down and then the actual practical aspect of it is very different than what the intention was. So there was a question from Mariella. What's the difference between stigma and bias? Bias is where you have a particular lean towards or against something. I have a bias towards basketball over football as a sport. That is because I believe that basketball is a great sport. And again, I coach basketball. So that's my bias towards basketball. Stigma would happen if I was using that bias and introducing discrimination or some way of withholding holding someone back because of that bias that I hold. So I hope that answers your question. If anyone else has any ideas or different ways of looking at bias and stigma, I look at bias as a belief. Stigma is a belief plus an action. So yes, I have this belief about someone, but now I'm adding an action that's going to hold them back or not allow them to have the resources or supports that they want or need. So let me know. Thank you for that question. Oh, thank you. I love it. Thank you for using that chat and for getting that in there. Okay. So when we look at stigma, it affects many different aspects of your own personal life and the way you think about yourself and the way that other people look at you. So stigma, it leads people to avoid getting help. Again, I don't want to be judged. I don't want to be labeled. So instead of going and getting help with a challenge that I'm living with, I'm just going to live with it. I don't have to deal with it. And I'm just going to continue going, moving along. It limits your opportunities. It affects the person's ability to find housing, jobs, which affects their health and quality of life. Again, we touched on that a little earlier with my friend that was trying to find an apartment here in Victoria. It leads to lower care. So it contributes to people with mental health challenges receiving a lower quality of care from the healthcare system. Not because they want to provide a lower quality of care, but because that inherent bias that's there leads to that discrimination piece of, oh, well, I'm originally from Winnipeg, and there was a story a couple of years ago, probably even before I left in 2012, where there was an individual who was Indigenous again, who went to an emergency room, and they assumed or they put a stigma on him that he was probably intoxicated, so they didn't deal with him. And what he ended up dying in the waiting room because he wasn't cared for, because there was a stigma or belief that he was probably just needed to sleep off whatever he was dealing with instead of dealing with him and the actual medical concerns that were present at that point. So it definitely leads to lower care, and it causes people to hide their mental health challenge, their drug use, or use drugs alone, which again, here in BC, we know with our opioid epidemic that is very dangerous to use drugs alone and to hide that drug use. And the drug use doesn't have to be opioids and fentanyl, but including substance use like alcohol, cannabis, cocaine, whatever other drug use that's going on there that we use to try to substance that we use to try to make things feel better at that point. But because of that stigma, we hide it from other people. So they might not even know that what's going on or what we're living with. So when we look at types of mental health stigma, there's three types I want to just focus on today. There's many types of stigma out there. And when it comes to mental health stigma, it's connected to that. But I really want to look at social stigma. And this is sort of what people look at as traditional stigma. These are negative attitudes or behaviors towards people who have mental health challenges or towards their friends and family. So, when we look at stigma, we often look at social stigma. This is the stigma that's around that people talk about, and they'll use words and language that really can get down and hold people back, like calling people addicts or users or whatever that happens to be. And we'll talk about why that's a problem. So social stigma is out there. It's sort of what we can traditionally think about stigma. Structural stigma really happens in healthcare and social services because it's the barriers that are put in place to help that prevent people from getting help within those systems. So the health system, it could be the long waiting list at an emergency room, or the fact that you go in there and that stigma, oh, you must be intoxicated, so just go sit over here and we'll deal with you when you sober up, instead of dealing with people as people. and saying, wow, you're here. So what's your concern and how can we help you at that point? So unfortunately, social stigma and structural stigma, it leads to self-stigma. And self-stigma is where we internalize the messages that people out there um, absolutely have, and we hear it, and then we start believing it, and we pull it into ourselves, and it becomes who we are. So when it comes to mental health challenges, it's when people start believing, I shouldn't get help because if I'm labeled as a schizophrenic, then no one's going to be able to hire me. No one's going to want to hang out with me. So I'll just not do that. So that stigma around being labeled as having a mental health challenge becomes really difficult to work through. Chris, structural stigma can also exist in a workplace. Absolutely, it can. Depending on where the power structure is and how that works, we all, I will put out there, we all have a level of bias in us. We do, whether it's inherent or it's something that is just sort of there. We all have prejudices and we all have beliefs when it's out there. So something like structural stigma can absolutely exist in a workplace, especially if when it comes to mental health challenges, and that belief that if I disclose that I have a mental health challenge, it's going to stop me from moving up the ladder into promotions or other opportunities, which again is against the Human Rights Code of BC and of Canada if you can prove that you were restricted because of a mental health challenge that you happen to have. So, Chris, I hope that answered your question. Stigma it really appears in all aspects in all walks of our lives. Anytime you're relating to other people, there's a chance for stigma to be there because, again, we all carry biases within us. We all have prejudices, whether we want to believe it or not. When you first saw me today, you had ideas in your head about who I was. And yes, this is a workshop, so, some ideas on that. But before I introduced myself, everything that you thought of me was introduced in my introduction. Maybe you went on my LinkedIn page, but other than that, it's based on what you see and what you believe from me. As humans, we fill in blanks when we don't have all the information, and that also exists in the workplace, and it connects completely to stigma. Awesome question, Chris. Thank you so much for that. So when we talk about stigma, the reason that I have such a concern for it and really want to talk about it is because stigma leads to shame. And shame is an emotion that we have that can be extremely destructive and hold us back from connecting to things we want to do. So when we look at shame, shame is accumulated over time. It's not anything that, like there's stuff I feel shame about that I still hold on to that happened that I learned when I was a kid. And that belief has gone through my life and has led me to work on to move away from things that I didn't think I was able or capable of doing. But it also helped me to realize that, yeah, when I challenged it, I'm like, this isn't right, So when you have a shameful piece in your head, it really is holds you back and it really keeps you down. It's thoughts that are riddled with judgment on ourselves, regret, images of impending failure. There's no way out. And shame is different than guilt. And guilt is something that I think we all have on some things based on what we do. So I look at shame and guilt differently because guilt is believing I did a wrong thing. Yes, I am guilty. I did that. That is something that I did that was wrong. Shame is where you start believing that you are wrong. And when it comes to stigma and that mental health piece, whenever you are marginalized and put in a group of people and then discriminated against, you open up this door to believing that you are the problem. The only reason I'm being discriminated against right now is because of the color of my skin, the religion I believe in, or my mental health challenge. So it is something wrong with me. And when we have a shameful belief system and we believe that we're stuck in there, it's really difficult for us to get out and see options because this is how we are viewing the world around us. So when it comes to marginalized people and mental health challenges and stigma, there's a lot of shame that comes from different aspects of life, just in living and who we are and all the messages that we've been given throughout our lives that can lead to shame, that can lead to that belief that I am wrong, and that something's faulty with me. When really, we all have faults, but we're not wrong. We're not bad people. We are people that are trying to do, I truly believe that we face life with our best intentions. We try to do the best we can. And sometimes we're successful, but other times we're not. And if we're not, that doesn't mean that I'm a bad person, that I am just flawed. It just means that I'm going to work through it and try to continue working through that. So when it comes to stigma, stigma really is connected to shame and really has it's sort of that opening of the door to slide into that shameful way of thinking with ourselves. So how do we're talking about mental health stigma? How do we help end mental health stigma? Um, do not like these are just general rules that I would put out there for everything, and really helps us looking at our inclusive language as we move forward. So do not define any person by their mental illness or drug use. Someone is not an addict because they happen to use substances. They are a person who uses substances. And I think it's just there's power in not knowing that I am an addict, that this is who I am, that there's no hope for me to get out of that. But if I'm a person that uses substances, then I can also be a person that doesn't use substances. And I think that is an easier way of working through things. Be respectful, compassion, and caring of others. It's that whole piece of empathy, right? Understanding who people are, that again, we're all trying to do the best we can, and we're trying to live this life the best we can. So no judgment, just be compassionate to others and ourselves. And we'll talk about self-compassion as we move forward. Educate others, your friends and families, pass on facts and challenge stereotypes. Ending stigma is about having conversations about mental health, and truthful, factual information about mental health. It's sort of what we're doing right now, instead of the beliefs and the stuff that we put out there and we create trying to make sense of the world. Remember that addiction is a treatable medical condition. And actually, there's lots of mental illnesses that are absolutely treatable, where people can and will return back to normal life, as long as they get treatment that's adequate and timely. So, it's not a choice. Living with an addiction is not a choice. Maybe initially using that substance at the beginning was a choice, but the addiction is something that happens to them and us, and that we are living with and trying to survive through, not necessarily a choice to be addicted. And be aware of your attitudes and behaviors. And really, this is the underlying current of everything that we're going to talk about. Your attitudes and behaviors, being aware that we have implicit bias in what that is, being aware that we might have some prejudiced thoughts, and being aware of that and not acting on them so that we are discriminating against other people. All of our beliefs and attitudes are influenced by stereotypes, negative stories, and images about people with mental illnesses or who use drugs. If you watch any media, you will be inundated with images and thoughts and characters who are living with mental health challenges that might not be the healthiest people out there. So then we start labeling everyone with mental health challenges being like that, and it's not fair for them at all. So making a difference. So just how to end stigma, know the facts, educate yourself about substance use and mental health problems. Again, this is a step for that, and we have some resources that you can use later on that definitely will help you connect and learn more about mental health challenges and what they are. Be aware of attitudes that are passed on by society and reinforced by your family, your friends, and the media. There's lots of attitudes out there that are rather negative, connected to mental health challenges and just people of marginalized groups. And being aware of that and not passing those on and challenging other people in your circle around that. Include everyone with mental health and substance use problems. Everyone has a right to take an equal part in society. So keep them included. Don't single them out or say that, oh no, they're not ready to take on this. Educate others, pass on facts about positive attitudes about people with substance use and mental health problems. Please don't let the media depiction of someone with a mental health challenge be the one that people are going towards. Challenge that and talk to other people about other, people or your own mental health challenges. Focus on positives. Health problems are just one part of who we are, right? We don't judge someone with a physical illness as this is who they are. Oh, they have a cold. They absolutely are not able to connect or do anything. Yet we do that with mental illness, and it's unfair for people living with mental illnesses. And I'll just put out there, I usually say this earlier, but I haven't yet. I don't have a diagnosed mental illness, but I live with anxiety and depression on a regular basis. In fact, you should have seen me about half an hour before I came on this webinar today. I was really quite not nervous, but definitely very focused on what I was going to say and how I was going to say it, and trying to make sure that this worked out well. So, um, support choices of other people, encourage efforts to get well because there is hope on the other side. And choose your words carefully. The way we speak can affect the way other people think and speak. We are catalysts of language, and when we use language in a healthy way, it helps support people. If we use language in a destructive way, it also helps destroy people and take them down. So, just looking at the power of language now, we've sort of done the preamble on the stigma piece. So here's language and what we're talking about. Not a problem, Alicia. Thank you. That's what we're here for. So when we look at language, language is constantly evolving. And I'm just going to put out there, please, we're going to talk about self-compassion. Be compassionate to yourself if you're on this journey of trying to use and incorporate inclusive language into your day-to-day stuff, because it is evolving. There's a time years ago when certain labels were okay, and they were seen as progressive in that sense. But those days, some of those have changed, and it's about really understanding where language is right now and evolving with the language. So realize the words we choose have the power to perpetuate ignorance and bias, for sure, right? If we are using negative word language and we're putting people down, that will perpetuate it. I always talk about a snowball being from Winnipeg. You take a snowball, you roll it down a hill. It starts off this big, and then it gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. That momentum happens also with language. If we don't challenge language when we hear it, if we go along with it, then that's okay for that language to continue, and that's what builds up into a bigger thing that can be really harmful. But words can also have the power to foster and maintain good relations with others. And I think we know that. We use that every day. If you're in any type of a caregiving situation, you know how to use language in a helpful, supportive way. And it's just taking those principles and building and expanding on that. The words also have the power to respectfully and accurately represent people and ideas. And that's what we're trying to do today, is really give you some ideas on how to accurately represent people the way they want to be represented, and the way that best identifies who they are as people and not illnesses or conditions. So develop positive acknowledging and inclusive language rather than potentially stigmatizing language that may provoke fear and disconnection, right? We are trying to build people together and connect people in a way that we can all share, instead of pushing people away and identifying where they're different. So I hope that makes all sense. So when we talk about inclusive language is essential in creating safer environments for all community members. Again, if you want to create a safe environment for people, talk to them as they would like to be discussed and brought up and identified, right? By labeling people and assuming we know what they are and who they are and what their experience is, it really belittles what their experience really truly is. And it keeps them stuck in this stigmatized piece of, this is the group you belong to because of your skin color. Inclusive language does not deliberately or inadvertently exclude people. Inclusive language is called inclusive language because it's about bringing people together and bringing people inclusively together, and including as many people as we can within the language that we're using. Inclusive language is free from words, phrases, or tones that reflect prejudiced, stereotyped, or discriminatory views. So again, the more that we use inclusive language, the less we're using language or views that can be discriminatory and hurtful to other people. And inclusive language aims to address all people in a productive and respectful manner, culturally safe, trauma informed, and equitable language. So, again, culturally safe, being aware of culturally who the people around you are and how they'd like to be addressed. Trauma informed, so addressing people as if they have been they've dealt with trauma, because I believe we all have in some level, and equitable. So, not it's not equality, it's not trying to make sure everyone's the same. It's using language that is equitable, so allowing people to feel connected and that I have the right to be the same opportunities as you, equitable. I hope all this makes sense. Please let me know if there's anything that is not sure for yourself. I'm just kind of zipping through here. So, benefits of inclusive language. Again, I wouldn't be talking about it if there wasn't benefits. Promotes higher employee engagement, superior customer service, and increased productivity. Everyone feels great if you are using inclusive language because they feel included in part of that piece. Important aspect of positive work culture, right? If everyone's feeling positive about themselves, then we all feel connected to each other. Inclusive language helps prevent feelings of exclusion and discomfort. I think we all kind of see that. It promotes a greater sense of inclusion and engagement. Of course it does. Jordan, can you expand briefly on the culturally safe, especially when working alongside people from diverse group of people? Yeah, it's about being aware that, yes, I grew up in Canada. My family originated from the Caribbean. So I'm going to have different ways of views of looking at things, different views of dressing food and that aspect than someone who grew up in Canada or that came from somewhere else to Canada, even no matter what the background is. So when we talk about culturally safe, it's creating an environment where everyone feels safe to talk about their culture and who they are and what practices they're practicing and what are some of the foods and the cultures that they have and traditions that they do. And have those represented in a place that is okay to talk about this, even if it is outside of the normal cultural norms of that are going on and that exist out there. So when we look at, I'm just going to put this out there. I tend to use quotation marks around normal because I believe that normal, when we look at things, are usually based upon the group that has power in a culture or in a society. So the group that has the power is are the people that can identify what normal behavior is. So anything outside of that is considered abnormal. So when I do, which I think is absolutely out of this world and wrong. So I always do normal in quotations because it's not, there is no normal way of living. But when I talk about normal, it really is that the group of power that happens. So when I talk about culturally safe, it's about creating a space that is available for people to talk about what's normal for them, even if it is outside of the normal aspects of culture that we represent within the workplace. Jordan, I hope that answers the question. Please let me know if you have anything else there. I know you asked briefly. It wasn't necessarily a brief one there. Okay, awesome. And Mariella, inclusive, cultural, safe environment allows people who are part of marginalized groups to express themselves without others denying their experiences. Thank you so much for that. That is a great definition of that. Oh, thank you so much. I can't agree with you more. So just some principles for, I like that last bit about making space to what's normal for them. Thank you. And again, it's about realizing that and allowing that space for people to talk about what their life is like and what goes on for them and what's a day in the life. The old Beatles song, Day in the Life. It's different for each and every single one of us, whether we're from the same culture or from different culture, same religion, different religion. So it's understanding that and embracing those differences and asking, what's your life like? And with generous curiosity and empathy. So some principles, these are principles that are out there on inclusive language. They are in, I know that Carissa put some reading materials in the chat. So this is absolutely part of there. So I won't spend too much time on here, but these are the aspects for principles for inclusive language. Susan, is asking cultural questions considered a microaggression? It depends. It really does depend. When it comes to cultural questions, it depends on how you approach it, and it depends on what your intention is, right? So microaggressions can, there are those little pieces in there, but if you're approaching someone with general curiosity and positive intentions, asking about your cultural differences could be really valuable, and saying like, so how do you practice your, what foods do you like to eat, that kind of thing, and going through that and having a conversation. Because, I love roti and I love, pilau and all these Caribbean dishes that, a lot of people don't have the opportunity of tasting. And I think they're great. So being able to work through and talk about that with general interest, and not so much, as a throwaway. So what's that about? And Susan, I hope that answers your question a bit. Jay, how do you help people understand the difference between inclusive language and being politically correct? I'm not sure about the sentiments in Canada, but in the US, there are some folks who express anti-inclusive um, language sentiments. They deem it as being woke. What's your advice for addressing resistance to inclusive language? There's going to be people that are going to be resistant to everything out there. Um, I always try to challenge, if I hear someone that I don't like the term woke, because again, really it's about being human and being connected to other people. And if there's some reason why we don't want to connect with people, that's their own thing. That's not a bigger piece. So yeah, when it comes to addressing, I'm that person who will challenge people. And if I hear something that I disagree with, I'll just, I'm not like, hey, that's wrong. But I'll say, like, yeah, like if someone says, oh, that person's an addict, I'll say, yeah, it must be really difficult to live with an addiction. It must be really difficult to have you wake up and feel like you need this and there's no way to work around that. And then it just plants that seed that maybe I don't want to be the person that's shaming them into what they're saying and changing their language, but planting a seed to say, like, hey, there's different ways of looking at it, I think really becomes important. But again, be safe to yourself and where that works for yourself. I hope that helps. Hope that helps, Jay. Jordan, I wonder too if the rapport and relationship that you have with the person first may impact how the questions received. Absolutely. Absolutely it will. And having that relationship and being genuine with your questions and being genuine, being able to talk to them and have that relationship initially, and not maybe starting off with, hi, my name is Jeff. What culture are you from? It's about, hi, my name's Jeff. This is who I am, blah, blah, blah. And then working through that as it naturally comes up. Peggy, inclusive language is for everyone, and everyone, sorry, it jumped, and everyone benefits from it. I agree completely. Not a problem, Jay. Thank you. And thank you. Okay, awesome. I love that. Inclusive language principles here. I hope you had enough time to look through there. Really, what I want us to think about when it comes to language is think about using person first language, especially if it's connected to a mental health challenge. So person first language focuses on the individual while de-emphasizing the illness, the disability, or the condition. Using it shows respect for an individual as a person rather than abnormal, dysfunctional, or disabled. Person first language is an individual who lives with schizophrenia, a person with lived or living experience of substance use versus a schizophrenic or an addict. And again, it's just, I think it's a healthier, more humane way of approaching people by talking about the people first and then looking at what they're living with afterwards. There are groups of people that definitely prefer identity first language. So identity first language is rooted in the relationship between the personal culture, identity, and a disability. So individuals and groups who use it as part of their identity focus on their unique abilities rather than the disability. So this happens with people that live with autism. Some people want to be referred to as an autistic person. or definitely people living with hearing impairment. Some people would rather be known as a deaf person because it's not so much not seen as an illness. You know, I'm living with a hearing impairment, I'm living with autism. It is a part of who they are and a fabric of who they are. So I'm an autistic person or I'm a deaf person. So this becomes really complicated when it comes to addressing people. So my rule of thumb for sure, well, I hate that term. My general rule is to talk to people and ask them, how would you like to be referred to? Yes, absolutely, Kelly. I think it's a major component of it. I'm in the chair and prefer to be called a disabled person. Agree, that's part of me and I'm proud. Awesome. Thank you so much, Meredith. Absolutely. Right. So it's important, again, to ask, where are you at? How would you like to be identified? How do you identify yourself? Right. People ask me that all the time, being that my skin tone is darker and my family's from the Caribbean. And I always had a difficult part to it because I don't like to be referred to as black. I think if on the census, there's all these different countries that people originate from, and then there's black, and black is that piece. So I am a fan. I did a workshop with Len Pierre, who was fantastic, talking about reconciliation and indigenous concerns, and I like the way that he identifies people living with challenges that aren't part of the normal society, that are considered marginalized. And he refers to people that are marginalized as part of the global majority. And I love that because the vast majority of people on this earth are living with some aspect, something that's going to marginalize you or put you out onto something else. So by labeling us ourselves as the global majority, I think that is a nice way of addressing that. Um, Sorry, I just went back a couple ones there. Okay. Sorry, I meant to do this and check on the chat. Uh, Mariella, it's important to mirror the language of a person experiencing mental illness or neurodiversity. Absolutely. Absolutely. If someone identifies themselves as saying, I'm a deaf person, please feel free to identify them as deaf. If someone says, I am living with a mental health challenge, then please do not identify them as a schizophrenic or an addict. Say that they're living with a mental health challenge. I love that. So just wrapping things up, taking action. We always look at stopping stigma by using the STOP acronym. So, and it's really thinking about your own behavior and your language. Does the attitude or your language or your action stereotype people with mental health condition, trivialize people with mental health conditions, offend people with mental health conditions, or patronize people with mental health conditions by treating them as if they're not as good as other people? If it does any of that, then your language is probably leading towards stigma. So just as an idea, as a stereotype, a traditional stereotype, stigmatizing language would be mentally ill people are violent, which is absolutely not true. But if you watch the media, you would definitely get that belief that people living with mental health challenges or mental illness are violent. When really, a respectful way of looking at it, people who live with mental illnesses are no more likely to be violent than someone without mental illness. And that's truth. So always fight stereotypes and the stigmatizing language with truth. And if you have truth, that's a great way to weaponize yourself and challenge the stigma. Trivializing, they should just snap out of it. Well, that could be more respectful. They may need support in order to get better, right? Because again, truth, understanding that they're people and that we're here trying to help them through that. Stigmatizing language to offend. This is not urgent. Don't be so OCD about it. Oh my goodness. When I hear someone say OCD as just a throwaway line instead of an actual connection to a diagnosis of obsessive compulsive disorder, it I don't like it. I'll just put it that way. So more respectful language. This is not urgent, so you can work on it next week. You know, it's not something you need to do right away. And patronizing, we won't ask you to do it because it might be too stressful, can lead to how would you feel about taking on this task? And again, just a way of addressing the concern, but in a way that's respectful and not stigmatizing and signaling people out as being different. So I hope this was helpful. Just things to think about. Does the individual or group have preferred terms? If they do, please try to use them. Is the reference to a person's gender, culture, ethnicity, age, etc. relevant? Do you need to even reference that someone happens to be, male or identifying as Afro-Caribbean or global majority? Does that need to be there? If not, do not include it. Why would you? Think about, am I staying open and curious and encouraging others to do the same? And does your language reflect the diversity of the intended audience? So again, are you using language that is what the audience is looking for? Some things to check for yourself. Your mindset matters. Please be curious and empathetic mindset. Gender inclusive, person-focused language. A lot of that is in the readings that I have for you. That's in the chat. So again, be self-reflective, you preferred language, all the stuff that we're talking about. It's here. You'll get a copy of this as we look forward. What can you do? Tell someone else your mental health challenges, about your story about mental health and mental illness. We all have a relationship with it. So talk to people about it. The more we talk about mental illness and mental health challenges, the less the stigma becomes, because it becomes normalized and part of the vernacular. Seek direct contact by helping people out in organizations that are dealing with substance use or mental health challenges. Think about your words you use. Do you use people-centric language, or do you use identity-first language? And do you know why you're using those when you're using them? Think about how you personally support and treat people around you with mental health challenges, because we all have people in our lives that are living with and challenging and struggling with that. How do we support them or not support them? And speak up when you see discrimination in a way that is safe and works for you. Okay, I know we're almost done here. Just want to be very aware. Please be kind and self-kind to yourself when you are going through this and looking at language you use. This is, again, language evolves. This isn't something that you have a book and you hold on to it and doesn't change. So be kind to yourself when you're trying to do this, because we can be so cruel to our own selves when we're trying to be someone that's supportive to other people and happen to say something the wrong way or misgender someone, or, be kind to yourself and be aware of that and talk about it. Just some support lines and some support, mental health support line. If you're dealing with any type of mental health challenge here in BC, 310-6789. It's available for everyone 24 hours a day. There is no area code. If you just want to talk to someone about mental health challenges, but it's not absolutely necessary, or it's not crisis at that point. If it is a crisis, then the suicide helpline, nationwide 988. If you're looking for resources on mental health challenges and mental health information, United Way resource line has 211.ca. Lots of resources put on the United Way throughout BC and Canada. Of course, Canadian Mental Health Association, national, and our BC division here, websites there for that. Some resources, workplace, mental health. These are some of our, I'm going to put all this in the chat for you to access right now, actually. And then that way you can have all these links for yourself. So let me just do that. Chat, there we are. So all this is in there. That should be there for you. All those links are live and really good information for you to connect with on that. Let me just pull this up again. Okay, and continue the work. This is the BC division. This is something on stigma and discrimination. So if you want to read an article on this, it's right there for you. I know people have to go. Thank you so much. Just think for your own self, your own mental health and resiliency. What are you going to do this evening to help yourself out? We all have asks and tasks that we can do to work through that. Any questions, please feel free to reach out to me. Here's my contact information. If you have any questions about any of this, thank you. Thank you, everyone, for this. Thank you for joining me today.